Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of In Poverty, the Lunch and Learn series hosted by United Way Young Leaders. My name is Samantha Ashby and I serve as chair of United Way Young Leaders. We're a group of engaged young professionals learning together and working to create a community-wide change. So glad you're here with us today. Thank you for zooming in with us to learn more about board service. If you missed the previous lunch session with Michelle Guthers-Clark, that recording is available at unitedwaygso.org/learn. And if you haven't had a chance to RSVP for the June 18th session of this three-part series, you can do so at unitedwaygso.org/learn as well. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to offer a big thanks to our young leaders who planned this engaging and informative series. And also, I would like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to our gold sponsor, P&G. Thank you to our bronze sponsors, an anonymous donor, Cone Health, and Contours Emerging Leaders Group. And thank you to our friend sponsor, Lincoln Financial Group. Today's featured speaker is Kim Gatling. She's a partner at Fox Rothschild Law Firm here in Greensboro, and she's also the board chair of United Way of Greater Greensboro's Board of Directors. The list of honors Kim has received is many, and to name a few, Kim was awarded the 2018 Leadership Medal by Leadership Greensboro. She was named to Triad Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and Outstanding Women in Business. And for many years, she has been named to the best Lawyers in America's list for intellectual property litigation, patent litigation, patent law, and trademark law in North Carolina, and that's just to name a few. Kim's talk is titled Incorporating Board Service into Your Journey, and we'll know that you'll learn something new today. As you have questions, please ask them in the chat box, and Kim will address as many as she can at the conclusion of her presentation. Please join me in welcoming Kim Gatling. Kim, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samantha. I am very excited to be here with you all today. I'm sorry that we're not able to meet in person, but I always appreciate that technology still allows us to come together. So I'm going to talk with you today about my journey. You all's journey may not be exactly the same as mine, but I am happy to share my experience with all of you. Serving the community is something that is so integrally important to me. And actually, in thinking about how I got started, it really just was the way that I grew up. My parents were both very involved in our community, particularly after my parents retired, they got even more active in the community. And so it was really all I knew as a child was that we were blessed, that we had an opportunity to give our time and talents to organizations to help people that just needed a hand up, not even a hand out necessarily. And so my parents just really set the model for me in growing up. And so once I got into high school and into college at A&T, again, I just continued to implement that service piece, not because I was required to, but because it was something that I wanted to do. That was just a part of me. So I'm very thankful for my parents instilling that in me in a young age. Those of you who might have logged on a little bit early today heard me mention that I have 3 kids. I have 3 boys who are 8, 9, and 16. And, you know, being really involved in the community means a lot of meetings and a lot of time away. But I hope that my kids will grow up also seeing how important it is to me and how important it is for us as a family to give back. So I hope I am laying that same foundation for my children that my parents laid for me. Next slide. So why United Way matters to me. The United Way of Greater Greensboro is such an innovative board. United Way has been around for a very long time and in Greensboro for 98 years. And we're almost coming up, obviously, on our 100th anniversary. And when I think about the evolution of United Way, particularly here in Greensboro, it is simply amazing because of the great leadership that we've had. But, we now have an open funding model where we are really focused on being able to impact the community and having a way to measure that success with this very unique integrated services delivery model. And I was actually I've been on the board for quite a long time, but I was on the board when we were not doing open funding, when we were not focused on an integrated service delivery model, and we had still been in the mode of just continuing to fund the same partner agencies every single year, depending on the results of the campaign. And I'm so thankful that we have moved into this new model and that our board voted to do so many years ago, because now we're able to really focus all of our efforts on this goal, as you know, of ending poverty in Greater Greensboro. And we're really going to be able to show, as we have this bold goal and be able to measure ourselves against it, just all of the strategy, all of the think tank work that has gone into this, all of the resources from the community through the campaign and otherwise, will really be able to show how we've made a difference. So United Way, it's been a blessing to serve on this board, and especially to have gone through the evolution from the traditional model of funding partner agencies to now this open funding model with the focus on integrated services delivery. So it's really, really been good for me. I'm going to back up just for a minute before we go into why nonprofit organizations need boards, and just say, as I mentioned, it's been such a blessing serving on United Way, but I want you to know that I didn't start out the gate, obviously, serving on a board like United Way, that it really started many years ago, getting involved with some smaller organizations and then kind of working my way up, for lack of a better word. When I first got out of law school, I was working at my law firm, and one of the partners approached me about serving on a board of a newly formed organization that was going to help children who were suffering from loss and were grieving, and it was going to provide some artistic resources for those children. It was a very, very small nonprofit organization, but that was my first board experience right out of law school, and I really learned a lot. And based on that experience, I went to a couple of partners in my firm who I knew served on boards and talked to them about their experience. And one of the partners said, Kim, if you want to get involved in more organizations and more board work, he said, one of the things that you can do is to try to join a committee of a board. A lot of times boards will have committees that are comprised of both board members and non-board members. And I took an interest in Habitat for Humanity at that time. And so I reached out to the organization and said that I wanted to get involved. And I was obviously donating financially as well. I was, I think, a second year associate at that time. So my financial donation probably was not that large, but I was doing what I could at that time. And Habitat for Humanity offered me a position on one of the committees that would go and vet families who were applying for housing through Habitat. And so I think I spent about 2 years on that committee, and we would go and visit with prospective homeowners and talk about their interest in the program and kind of vet them to make sure that they were suitable for the program. And it was really great having that interaction with families who wanted to have home ownership, have that blessing of home ownership. And because of the work that I did on that committee, when a board position became available, they did extend that opportunity to me. So that was my first bigger board, I will say, or more established board that I joined, was Habitat for Humanity. And I spent several years on that board, ended up chairing the audit committee for several years, which is a little interesting given that I don't have a financial background, but that's one of the great things about board service. It allows you to expand your knowledge base and to learn about other areas that you might not otherwise have a background in. So I had served on that audit committee for quite some time, and then ultimately moved up to be chair of the audit committee. So again, one of the ways you can think about getting involved just from a grassroots perspective is just to go and join a committee of the organization. And if you do good work and you show that you're dedicated to the mission and that you're active, then hopefully once board positions become available, then those offers will be extended to you. And so after Habitat, kind of one thing just led to another. I served on the board of Triad Stage, the theater. So that was interesting because it was arts related. Learned a whole lot on that board as well. And I really feel like, even though I feel like I'm giving to the organization of my time, I get so much from the board service too. I cannot even tell you how much I've learned about different areas and facets ever since I've been serving on board since I've been out of law school. So it's really, to me, I feel like I'm blessing the community, but I feel like I'm being blessed in return as well. So let's move on now to why do nonprofit organizations need boards? So a board really provides all of the governance and oversight for the organization. And that's really important legally. In order to have the protection of a nonprofit entity, you have to have appropriate legal oversight and you have to have appropriate management oversight. And ultimately, all of that rests with the board of directors. And the CEO of the organization actually reports directly to the board of directors. So in this case, Michelle Gathers-Clark technically reports to the board of directors. And as you all know, she's an absolutely fantastic CEO. But legal and fiscal compliance are critically important. Boards have to constantly monitor and understand the finances of the organization. We're always looking at where are we budget-wise, what are we forecasting for the future, what changes do we need to make, if any, to accommodate for what we are forecasting in the future. And I was saying before about me having a bit of a deficiency on the financial side, and to give you a background, my undergraduate degree is in electrical engineering. So I literally went through college and never took an accounting course, never took a business management course because I was 100% focused on my engineering curriculum. And then I went on to law school to become a patent attorney so that I could still use my engineering background. But having said that, once I started serving in all these roles and serving on these boards, financial oversight is a huge part of it. So I've had to learn how to look at accounting statements and understand them. I've had to learn what it means in terms of the audit and the terminology and what is the impact of that. I don't know that I will ever be an expert in that because I just don't have the educational background for it. But I can tell you it's because of my board service that I have learned so much in that area. And as a board member, I have a legal obligation to at least have some minimal understanding so that I can provide the appropriate oversight to the organization in accordance with my board duty. And then finally, informing and influencing decisions. So I talked about how early in my year serving on the board, we were still doing the open funding model at United Way. It was a really, really big deal when we engaged in that strategic planning and decided to do a total shift to this open funding model. I'm sorry, I was saying before when we were doing the routine giving every year to the partner agencies. And then we went into strategic planning and literally did a complete shift to an open funding model and decided to work towards integrated services delivery and to become issue focused, singularly focused on ending poverty in Greensboro. All of that influence and strategy was done at the board level, of course, together with the staff and very much including the staff as part of that decision making. But ultimately, it rested with the board to say, we are going to change the way that we as United Way of Greater Greensboro do business. So all of that informing and influencing decisions stems from the board level. So why is it important for boards to be diverse? So according to a national survey by BoardSource, 96% of organizations believe diversifying their board or executive committee is a key objective. but only 24% have taken crucial action steps to increase levels of diversity within their board of directors. I talk about diversity all of the time, both in my legal practice and in everything else I do. There is scientific data that says that when you have a diverse group of people, they can solve problems better and faster. So why wouldn't every single organization want that if the science shows that diverse teams can do it faster and better? I'm very proud to say that the United Way of Greater Greensboro, along with several of the other boards on which I serve, are 100% dedicated to diversity. And let's talk about what diversity means in the context of a board. Yes, it includes all of the obvious factors like race and gender. But diversity also means having people that come to the table with different life experiences, with different professional backgrounds, different professional experiences, because it really takes a combination of everybody tackling issues through their own respective lens to come up with the best solution. So even though I'm not a finance guru, I'm an engineer at heart. I think about things very methodically and technically. So I bring my own lens to the table when we're talking about issues. Someone who comes from a financial background, I think about the chair of our finance committee, who is just fantastic. I'm in awe when I hear about him talk about our accounting and forecasting for the future. He brings a certain lens to the table. So all of that comes into play almost like a salad bowl. You know, you've got your lettuce, you've got your tomatoes, you've got your cucumbers, but everything together makes for a really great salad. And that is the same with respect to boards. And the United Way, like other boards that I'm on, we are always thinking about governance from the perspective of assessing where we are today and what are any of the holes that we need to fill. So if we see that maybe we're light on people that have a financial background, then we want to make sure we're looking for prospective board members who would come to the table with that experience. Or if we say we're looking very, very heavily women or male right now, we want to balance that out a little bit more. That helps to guide us as we think about our governance pool and people that we want to bring onto the board of directors, because we do recognize the importance of having that diversity on the board. And the reality is everybody's voice matters. That's why we bring this combination of people, because we want them to speak up and to poke holes in our arguments based on what they think and what their life experience is. If we only had a homogeneous way of thinking on the board, then there could be issues that we're clearly missing. There could be consequences of actions that we are clearly missing. So we want to have healthy dialogue. We want to have healthy debate. And the only way to encourage that is by having diversity of thought. Next slide. So what are your responsibilities as a board member? I've touched on these a little bit, but these are really the legal obligations that you have as a fiduciary of the organization. And those are the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. So when we talk about the duty of care, it's really being competent about the organization, being prepared for meetings. Even on the United Way board, we always send out a pre-read in advance of the meeting, because we don't want to use up people's meeting time just hashing out details that they could have read about in advance of the meeting in order to be prepared. So we do expect for people to pay attention and to read that correspondence. You also have a duty of care in terms of raising the red flag if you see something that doesn't make sense, or if you see something that appears to be irregular or that you're concerned about. You have a duty to speak up about that and to raise that concern or raise that issue with the rest of the board. So the duty of loyalty. On every board on which you will serve, and certainly on which I serve as well, we send out an annual conflicts of interest statement. And that's because we want to make sure that as board members are engaging in very important decision making, that they aren't doing so with a personal conflict or even a conflict that they may have with respect to their work or with their family. So as an example, if my law firm, were somehow involved in getting funding from United Way, that would never happen, but just bear with me on the example, then it would not be correct for me to participate in the vetting of distributing funding as a vendor to my firm because I have a direct conflict of interest. And so I have to report what that apparent conflict is and to make sure that I appropriately abstain from any discussions and voting on decisions which relate to that particular conflict. So that duty of loyalty is very, very important. And that is a legal obligation that you have to be loyal to the organization and to not try to use it for your own personal or professional gain. And then the duty of obedience, which is to always act in accordance with the organization's missions and goals. As part of the board, you're helping to drive that mission and drive the goals, and then you have to make sure that the decision-making aligns with that. It is being obedient to the heart of what the organization is designed to do. Next slide. So what do you gain from nonprofit service? I mentioned earlier just what a blessing I feel like it is to me because I get the opportunity to learn so many things that I would not otherwise have an opportunity to learn in my professional life. But of course, meeting people. I've met so many people on my board service journey of varying backgrounds and varying passions. And I love meeting people, so that's been great for me, having the ability to network with them. And again, applying your skills to service, learning those new skills, deepening your understanding of issues. Just take poverty as an example. I came to Greensboro when I was 17 to go to A&T. And apart from leaving for 3 years to go to law school, I've been here ever since. But me living in my own bubble and coming back to Greensboro working as a professional, I was even largely clueless as to understanding the magnitude of the poverty issue in Greater Greensboro. And so because of this work that we've been doing with United Way, I've been able to deepen my understanding of the issues that plague the community. And I'm glad to be able to have that greater level of understanding because that then helps me to make better decisions about how to attack the issues. And then, of course, it does help to build your resume. I don't think anybody gets involved in community service or board work, or at least I hope not, just for the end game of building your resume. But it is certainly true that by doing this great work, it does allow you to put these experiences on your resume, and it looks good. I think that employers want to see that you are doing things outside of your, technical 8-to-5 job. And I also think it allows employers to see that you're willing to expand and to learn some new things. So that is an added benefit as well. How can you be the best board member you can be? We've talked about a little bit of this thus far, but attend the meetings and be prepared, and definitely use your voice. Again, as I said, if you are extended an opportunity to have a seat at the table, it's because the board is expecting you to use your voice with whatever experiences that you have that you bring to that seat with you. So really, in my opinion, one of the worst things that you can do in serving on a board is even if you attend all the meetings, but you don't say anything. So be engaged, come and be prepared, definitely read all the materials in advance of the meeting, and be a part of the discussion, an integral part of the discussion, and show your passion for the cause in doing that. We all want our board members to donate. It is really good for a nonprofit organization to say that it has 100% financial support from its board members. That is often a question that comes up when the organization is applying for grants, because grantors will say, well, why should we grant the organization any money if your own board members are not financially supporting the organization? And that financial support is whatever is meaningful for you, particularly in the case of the United Way and several other boards on which I serve. Come to the table being ready to learn, of course, and be strategic. So again, you have a seat at the table for a reason. It doesn't happen just by happenstance. You're there because people know your experience. They know what you can bring to the table. So use it. Use that in your decision making and being strategic about the decisions for the organization. So how should I seek board service? Definitely get involved with organizations that align with your values and interests. I talked about how I was seeking out organizations that I wanted to get involved with, and Habitat for Humanity sparked my interest very initially. There are so many great nonprofit organizations right here in Greater Greensboro, and you just have a plethora to choose from in terms of something that might align with your values and or your interests. There is now this LinkedIn group, thanks to Synergy, which is fantastic, that you can join that group and see what opportunities are available to get involved. I think that's a great resource that certainly did not exist when I was early on in my career and was looking to get involved. And then ask, because remember, I went to my law partner and asked about how to get involved, and he gave me some tips and information. If you know someone who was serving on a board of an organization that you might have interest in, definitely go and ask them, what is the best way to get involved in the organization? Every nonprofit entity wants to have engaged volunteers who are willing to step up to the plate and to serve in a leadership position. So definitely do not be shy about asking how you can get involved. All right, questions and answers.
And I just want to remind people that you can either raise your hand or type in the chat, and Kim will be able to answer your questions. We do have a question from Jim. He says, can you talk a little bit more from your experience about the balance of leadership between the board and the chief executive?
That is a great question. So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the CEO reports to the board. We here at United Way have a fantastic relationship between the board and the CEO, and that really is the goal of every organization. But the CEO is ultimately responsible for all of the staff and for all of the day-to-day operations of the organization. It is wholly inappropriate, as an example, for a board to be involved in literal day-to-day operations, even with respect to staff. That is not the responsibility of the board of directors. That is the responsibility of the CEO as the chief executive officer. So when we sit down and we talk about strategy, we're even doing strategic planning right now. Michelle, as the CEO, and key members of the staff are an integral part of that process, because the board of directors still needs to understand, as we think about strategy, what does that look like on an operational basis? We can't speak to that because we don't work at United Way. And so that's what Michelle and her staff provide, that input to us. So there very much is an appropriate balance between the two, in that the board of directors provides the oversight and the strategy, and the CEO is the chief, almost implementation officer of that as well.
And Lauren has asked, Kim, how would you recommend learning about your own values in order to find organizations that align with them? What did you find helpful in your own practice?
I'm sorry, I'm looking for that question, but can you repeat it again? Oh, I see it now. How would I recommend learning about your own values to find? That's a really interesting question. And to be honest with you, I think as you get older, you understand more kind of what your values and your interests are. But I can certainly remember being new in my career as a young professional and not yet defining exactly what those values are or what those interests were at the time. And so I think when I started seeking out opportunities to get involved, for one, I didn't have a LinkedIn group to go to find out about all the organizations. So I only knew to go to my law partners at my firm to ask them what was available or how I could get involved. And so I think I listened to what they told me and just kind of, I don't want to say randomly picked from there, but probably just thought about, okay, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Let me figure out about this organization and see if I can get involved. So that's a difficult question to answer. I would just say some of it too will just evolve over time. You know, get involved with an organization, and over time you may realize that you're developing more of a passion in another area. I certainly don't advise just dropping the ball once you've started something. You want to make an impact. And then once you feel like that season is up with that particular organization, then maybe you move on to the next that you might have a stronger interest in. So don't feel like you're pinned into making a 20-year decision right now. That's not the case. You will have different seasons with being involved in organizations, and your passions and your interests will change based on your life experience as you get older. So I would say don't worry about it too much right now. Find something that you can have fun with and learn, and then move on to the next when the season is right.
Awesome. We have another question from Brett in the chat. It says, Kim, can you please explain what open funding is and how the board came to the decision to go that route?
Great question. So when I first got involved with United Way, and before we had this current change to being issue focused, United Way, and let me be clear, there are many, many United Way organizations across the country who still operate in accordance with what I will call the traditional model. So United Way had long-standing partner agencies that it funded. And every year, essentially, or every other year, depending on the funding cycle, when it was time, the United Way would go back to those same organizations and look at what they were doing and make allocation decisions accordingly. But then we decided as a board that we wanted to make more of an impact on the community. And one of the ways that we realized we could do that was to narrow our focus. So instead of funding lots of different organizations, let me be clear, all doing really, really great work, but not all necessarily doing that same work towards the same end goal. So it had nothing to do with the quality of the services being provided by all of these other agencies. They are all doing fantastic work. But what we realized is that if we wanted to make a measurable impact on an issue, that we had to focus our resources on that issue. So we decided to go to issue focus, which was ending poverty, and to align our funding accordingly. So as part of that process, that meant that although we had been funding some fantastic agencies doing great work, if their work no longer aligned with our issue focus on ending poverty, then they were likely to not continue to receive funding for their programs because they didn't align with our new mission and goal. And so also as part of that, what we said is that instead of having programs that just automatically get funding at every funding cycle, we want to make sure, because we as an organization have a duty to all of our donors to show that we are using their dollars to really make an impact. And so we said that programs now have to compete essentially in the open market against other programs who are doing work to end poverty in Greensboro. And based on measurable outcomes and many other factors that we look at, we will base our funding decisions on that. So now if a program is funded in one funding cycle, they are not guaranteed funding in the next funding cycle. They will still have to go back into that open funding kind of open market process. And so long as they are showing, really good outcomes with the way that they are using the dollars, and provided that the funding is available, hopefully then they will get continued funding, but it is no longer a guarantee. And what we find is that having that open competition really drives results, and we owe that to our donors to show our results as the United Way of Greater Greensboro.
We have another question from Bailey. She says, when exploring organizations to consider committee or board service, what red flags would give you pause? How do you evaluate whether or not it'll be a good fit from your end?
Another great question. Um, I would say that you clearly want to do your research on the organization. And I would not just throw out the door an organization that is really new or relatively startup. As I mentioned, my very first board was one that was newly created and very, very small, still provided great learning opportunities for me. But you do want to try to do your research on the organization, talk to people who have been involved. And as I mentioned in response to an earlier question, that once you get committed, you certainly don't want to just drop the ball in the middle of your commitment and move on to something else. But I will say that participation on a committee level tends to be shorter term than committing to a specific board term that might be a 3-year term or a 2-year term. So if you get involved in a committee that is on a shorter term basis, maybe it's more aligned with the fiscal year, then you'll have a shorter cycle with which you might make a decision to say, you know, this was great, I learned some things, but I'm not sure that I'm still fully aligned with this organization, so I'm going to move on to something else. So committee work is a great way to kind of get your feet wet without going 100% all in and having a legal commitment to the organization. Oh, but let me go back. I don't know that you would have a window into this by serving on a committee, but some of the big things we talked about as being a fiduciary in terms of fiscal responsibility. You know, if you see things from a fiscal perspective that are concerning you, that's probably a red flag, or even concerns from a management perspective that are concerning you, that could be a red flag as well. So depending on what your position is in the organization, you know, you have an opportunity to raise some of those concerns. And if you're deeply concerned and feel like the best thing to do is to walk away, then do that.
Thank you, Kim. These are great questions and great answers. We have
They're stumping me.
You're doing awesome with them. We have 2 questions that are a little similar, so I'm going to kind of put them together. From Marcus and Allison about, Kim, how have you balanced your professional life, personal life, and being dedicated to your service with United Way and other community organizations? Can you share how you balance those responsibilities while serving on multiple boards and being a working professional? And how do you say no to certain opportunities that may arise?
That is a great question. So it is very difficult. I am perpetually exhausted, literally. And working in a law firm, as you all know, in private practice, I bill hours. I mean, my performance is measured by how much time I spend and bill on client matters. And it is just very difficult. I work all the time, especially since we've been home, working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. I come down here at my chair at 8 in the morning, and sometimes I don't leave it until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Now that is combined with still being a mom and for a period of time still helping to homeschool my children while they were home. But it's difficult. I mean, I cannot sit here and tell you that I am a master at balance or that I do it well. I always say for me, what I've decided is that there is always going to be some level of imbalance, and that the key is not having the imbalance tipped in the same way all the time. Meaning there are times I tell my kids, no, I'm not coming to your award ceremony because I've got to go to work or I've got to meet with the client. And then sometimes I have to walk away from my, billable hour work because I need to focus on an issue that's occurring with one of the organizations that I serve. So it's just a matter of the imbalance today, hopefully not being the same imbalance every day. And that on average, they're all getting the appropriate attention from me. So I'm not perfect, but I do my best, and it is not easy. On saying no, that is something I've gotten a whole lot better at as I've gotten older. I've really gotten a pinch because, and you'll find this, once you get involved in organizations and you do a good job and you're speaking up and using your voice, everybody will want you. And that's a great thing to be wanted, but it's not so great if you don't know how to say no or not right now to all of those requests. And there was certainly a time that I was in way, way, way over my head. And then on top of being way over my head, just with my involvement between community and work, I had two children back to back. My youngest two kids are 18 months apart, and I just was melting down. So I had to readjust. I had to learn how to say no. I had to roll off of some things when my term expired. And so now I can say that I just am much, much more protective over my time. I got a call last week about a great organization that I have a strong interest in about being involved. And my answer was, I would love to do this, but not right now. Please keep me in mind for the future, because I know I just can't add anything else to my plate. So my suggestion to you all as young professionals would be learn that a whole lot earlier than I did.
Thank you so much for your transparency with this. I think that it's so helpful for us to hear from your experiences and being able to guide like our own futures with that. Real quick, before we get to one last question, I think that we have room for, I wanted to reference the chat box that there is a link to the Synergy LinkedIn or post about board service. There's also a link to learn more about United Way's volunteer-led funding model. And there's also a reference to GuideStar being a place that you can look to find more information as a good resource on nonprofits. And yeah, I hope you're looking at the chat too, Kim. People are like, yes, thank you, I needed this.
Yeah.
So one last question would be, can you talk about building relationships with other board members and why those relationships are important?
Yeah, so again, because we are making very, very big decisions for the organizations that we serve, you want to have a really good professional and working relationship with the other board members. And all of the boards that I'm on recognize the importance of having an opportunity just to get to know one another. Most big boards will have an annual retreat, and the annual retreat is ideally designed to, yes, do some really big legwork as it pertains to setting strategy for the organization over the next year, but also just to have some social time, like some great icebreakers and to get to know you. Because remember when I talked about you're on the board for a reason, because of the lens that you have, because of your experience, because of your perspective. And that perspective and your voice may not always align with the board member sitting next to you, because they're coming from a different place and have a different perspective. And so you want to encourage that healthy dialogue. But as we all know, relationships are so important, because when you have a relationship with someone, it allows you to hear their differing opinion and receive it in a way that you know is still coming from a good place, even though you don't necessarily agree with it. And it promotes that healthy dialogue and healthy debate. So it is critically important to get to know the board members as best you can, to have that really good working relationship and to be able to hear from one another on differing opinions and agree to disagree on some things. You don't ever want to stifle anybody's opinion or perspective about an issue. Otherwise, there's no point in having diversity on the board at all.
Kim, thank you so much. I'll admit a little transparency on my end that I can no longer see the chat because a phone call popped up on my computer screen. So if there are any more questions on the chat that people see, I want to pop in and say, please do.
If there are any other questions, just a lot of compliments in the chat for you, Kim, and gratitude for you and for you as well, Samantha, for leading this call and for your leadership of young leaders. Lots of compliments in the chat.
Well,
Thank
Kim,
you.
Thank you so, so much for sharing your experience and this knowledge with us today. I know that we've learned a lot from you and are very thankful for your time. And for all of you on the chat, we have one more session in this In Poverty, the Lunch and Learn series that will be about volunteerism for mutual gain by the Vice Chair of Young Leaders, Marcus Thomas. And that is next Thursday, the 18th. And you can register at unitedwaygso.org/learn, where you can also see on that same link the first session, which was with the CEO of United Way of Greater Greensboro, Michelle Gathers-Clark. And the title of hers was What's Poverty in Greensboro? Myths, Facts, and Action. This chat or this recording will also be available. So if you want to reference back to all of the knowledge that Kim was able to share with us today, it'll be on that same link, and you'll get an email follow-up following this. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today, and we hope to see you next Thursday on Zoom, and have a great day. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.